At my wife's funeral, my children sent nightclub photos laughing, "She's gone. Enjoy life." I only whispered a calm goodbye. Days later, when the lawyer revealed her hidden conditions, their smug smiles turned into hollow silence. Some betrayal burned slow in a quiet family drama. Before we move on, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are right now. I'd love to see how far this voice travels. I stood frozen in the silent church. An oak casket lay under a white cloth, and a few carnations, Alara's favorites, caught in late light through stained glass, tinting the room a solemn, unreal blue. No second silhouette, no rustle of coats. Only my muffled sob and the thin wind testing the old windows. When Alara left, I had prepared for loneliness. I had not prepared for vacancy. Not like this. Even the priest hesitated, eyes skimming the empty pews as if searching for a reason to speak. I set my palm on the cold wood, steadying myself, and lifted my gaze to the front doors, the place my children should have filled. My phone chimed. A photo opened. A nightclub, hard neon, a glittering cocktail, mouths split in laughter. Liam and Sophia, arms high. The caption, "Come on, Dad, she's gone. You should enjoy life, too." I stared longer than I meant to. The hollow that should have drowned me gathered into heat, not hatred. Not yet. A low fire insisting I face what was true. Hours later, the cemetery smelled of wet clay. Drizzle stitched the air. I stood alone beneath a black umbrella, watching the fresh earth darken. Tears were done. What remained was a narrow, steady resolve knocking in my chest. That same evening, facts I would learn much later, Liam and Sophia sat with a lawyer named Wallace in a glassy restaurant. They signed pages with easy wrists. Liam laughed. Sophia kept tapping the crystal face of her watch like time owed her more. Days afterward, I sat in our small living room with a box of Alara's keepsakes warming my knees. I brewed tea because muscle memory demanded ritual. The kettle hissed. The radiator ticked. Ordinary sounds, indecent in their calm. I opened her journal. Her hand moved in careful loops, worries about the kids, the ways they'd changed, the fading patience in our house. Then a drawing stopped me. A small box sketched in pencil beside a precise place name, underlined twice as if whispering, "Remember." Across the city, in the penthouse they had just bought, my children planned renovations. "We'll tear down the wall, open the view," Liam said, hands slicing the air. "Marble island, clean lines." Sophia nodded, already scrolling through fixtures. The phone on the table buzzed. A text from the law office. Liam glanced, grinned, then froze, his mouth held open on a half-formed word. "What?" Sophia asked, reaching. She read, and the phone slid out of her fingers and clicked against the floor. They looked at each other, color draining as if someone had turned off the lights from within. They believed I saw nothing. They believed grief made me harmless. But there, in the hush of our house, with her journal heavy in my lap, lines began to connect. The ember inside me brightened, not to burn them down, to light a way back to what was owed to Alara. I remembered her veil lifting like a small sail the day we married, how she squeezed my hand when the band missed a note and we laughed because imperfection meant it was ours. Small anchors. They surfaced now, stubborn and clear, proof that what we built had been real, and proof that somewhere along the way someone had been quietly sawing at the beams. I tasted metal on my tongue, anger in trace amounts, then breathed until the taste thinned. "Be patient," she used to say, as if patience were an instrument you tuned, not a virtue you wore. Patience would be my method. I would look for proof. I would collect and keep it safe. No scenes, no shouting, just the work of a man who intends to keep a promise. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest, as if the paper could beat. The church doors were behind me, the grave ahead, and between them, a road I had not walked before but now understood belonged to me. Where does a father go when the children he raised toast the night while their mother sinks into earth? Pause. How do I carry love without letting it excuse harm? Final turn. My name is Arthur Caldwell. Sunlight, the name Alara whispered on mornings when the kettle clicked before it sang. I've carried silence for years. The looks that filed me under obsolete, the jokes that called me soft, the sighs when I chose an old book over a louder room. Our narrow house kept our vows in the maple floor and a chair I never quite fixed. Then the years shifted, not all at once, like light moving across a pew. Liam and Sophia were once proof we'd done something right. On my desk, a photo of two sticky children laughing under fireworks. Beside it now, Ilara thinner, my arm a bandage around her, the kids a step away, faces blue with phone glow. In that light I felt a season change, a draft under the door, a name I didn't yet know. It wasn't grief yet, it was family drama pressed into bone. "You okay?" I asked in the kitchen while the lid rattled. She nodded too quickly. "Just tired." She turned so I wouldn't see her mouth tremble. I let the moment pass like steam against glass. I shouldn't have. The table sounded different, not quiet, hollow. Liam's fork tapped like a small hammer. "There's opportunity everywhere," he said without looking up. Sophia laughed from the doorway, not with us, but near us. "We should open the space," she said, tracing the scar on our maple table. "Clean lines." Ilara changed the subject to weather and sat smaller in her chair. Something in the house loosened, a screw backing out of wood. I told myself it was work. A week lived too fast. They'd come back to the table, I thought, the way birds return to the same branch each spring. Denial is courteous. It takes off its shoes. But facts sharpen. Ilara stepped outside mid-story to answer a call she didn't want, then returned with eyes that didn't land. A receipt from a place we never went, her ring slipping on her finger. At night I practiced the face of a man who wasn't alarmed, until it failed me. One evening I found her at the sink, elbows locked, staring into lukewarm water. "Tell me what's hurting," I said. She pressed my palm to her cheek. "Not tonight." The words were soft. The fear wasn't. I should have asked again. I should have checked the numbers, the policies, the signatures. Instead, I replaced the porch bulb and called it progress. Thick envelopes began to arrive, urgency stamped in red. She slid them into a drawer as if hiding glass. "It's nothing," she said with a tired smile. "Then let it be nothing together," I answered. She kissed my knuckles and walked away. Polite words can wound. They leave nowhere to put the hurt. On Sunday I opened the old albums. Ilara touched the face of her mother, dust lifted in a column of late light. "We were good once," I said. She nodded, listening for a train we couldn't yet hear. That night, after she slept on the couch, I stood in the doorway and tried to name the sound inside the walls. I kept calling it worry. Something else was growing. I see it now. Quiet corrosion I mistook for kindness. I called it patience, so I wouldn't have to call it fear. "Dad, it's just timing," Liam said, tucking his phone like a card back into the deck. "You wouldn't get it." Sophia kissed Ilara's hair without meeting her eyes. "We're fine," she whispered, smiling for me, not at me. I smiled back because men like me keep building bridges out of hope even when the river is rising. Hope held me still. Stillness looked like consent, and in that space what I named ambition began to taste like betrayal. How long does a man watch smoke before he admits there is fire? How close can you stand to the door and still claim you are in the room? When the choosing came, would I keep swallowing the lie or taste the truth even if it burned on the way down? Before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. In the mirror, I met my own eyes until they flinched first. Then I closed them and saw Ilara standing by the window, her shoulder turned just enough to hide the phone, her face lit more by worry than by light. I stayed quiet, not from fear but from an old vow, to carry what I could, to protect her from what she couldn't name. Families weather storms, I told myself. They pass. I believed her sadness was sickness, the pressure of bills, the slow fatigue of years. I didn't ask. That was my first mistake. One night, through a door left kindly ajar, I heard Sophia. "We can't keep clinging to that old thing, Mom. Liam's got a plan. It's our future." Ilara's voice cracked soft. "But it's your father's. It means something." Sophia's tone cut the air. "Meaning doesn't pay for anything. You have to think bigger." The words dropped like stones into a still lake. Ripples spread. Old thing. Plan. My heart started counting beats it couldn't explain. They began visiting more often, but never with soup or stories. only folders. Drawers opened, shut, opened again. Whispers in corners, words cupped like a match against wind. Liam's eyes lingered on my old file cabinet, the one with the brass handle. I stood at the sink, drying the same plate twice, pretending not to see. On the stairs, Sophia found a letter Alara had written me when we were young. Campfire summer, ink smudged from her thumb. Sophia smirked, skimmed a line, tossed it into the trash without a word. I waited until she left, then pulled it out, brushing off coffee grounds. 2 lines glowed through the stains. Let's keep our life small but honest. And, when we get lost, meet me at the kitchen light. My chest made a sound no one should ever hear. The calls multiplied. After each one, Alara returned paler, the way milk cools to a thin skin. I caught pieces of her sentences. Estate, beneficiary, life insurance, once in a lifetime. The phone had become a bell for bad news. Each ring stripped a little more color from her face. We'd saved 30 years for Paris, our secret promise, 1 week of forgetting everything. One morning she sat on the edge of the bed, eyes swollen, voice flat. We should cancel. I asked why. She folded the brochure into a knife edge. The kids need capital for their startup. The word capital fell like a coin into a dry fountain. I nodded because words might have cracked the air. Dinner that night was quiet. Liam paced, phone in his palm like a beating heart. There's momentum, he said. We just need to free up some assets. Alara's fork clicked once against porcelain. Sophia traced the wood grain of our dining table like she was pricing it. Open the space, she murmured, eyes drifting toward our wedding photo. Clean lines. Later I went to the basement. The safe I'd built years ago still smelled of dust and varnish. Its dial was cold beneath my fingers, the combination carved somewhere in memory beneath an old hymn number. My father's papers had rested there once, mine do now. In the low light, I felt the house listening. I didn't like what it heard. That week, envelopes came stamped urgent in red. Alara tucked them into a drawer, smiling like someone balancing on thin ice. It's nothing, she whispered. Then let it be nothing with me, I said. She touched my cheek, a small, tired apology disguised as love, and walked away. I began to see the world in prices, what a chair might sell for, what an acre might yield. My son counted futures. My daughter counted exits. Their voices sounded like progress, polished, fluent, hollow, a family drama dressed in modern clothes, hiding its knives and napkins. That night I found Alara in the kitchen, forehead on her arm, kettle cooling beside her. Tell me, I said softly. She straightened, smiled like a hostess in her own home. I'm fine. The lie was delicate, the hurt wasn't. The next morning they came early. We just need the deed number, Liam said, already opening drawers. I stepped in front of him. Ask first. His jaw tightened. Sophia crossed her arms. Dad, don't be dramatic. She said dramatic the way some people say old. Alara stood between us, clutching a dishcloth, her eyes begging for peace that wouldn't come. After they left, I walked through every room like a man checking windows before a storm. I counted the places where our life still lived. I counted the places they'd touched. The air smelled like paper, metal, and want. Somewhere, a clock ticked faster than it should. Anger doesn't arrive with fire. It arrives like frost. Slow, creeping, deliberate. I heard myself whisper, enough. Not a shout, a verdict. My children weren't building dreams. They were building ladders from our bones. And I had been helping them climb. I carried the trash bag to the curb, the one holding Sophia's discarded letter. It felt heavier than paper, heavier than history. A neighbor waved. I waved back with a hand that didn't feel like mine. That night I looked again into the mirror, into eyes I barely recognized, and said, You're not a bystander. The reflection stayed silent, but the man inside it finally believed me. How long can love bend before it snaps? How long can a house hold its breath before someone calls it what it is? Betrayal? The hospital room hummed like a cold engine, lights dimmed to a bruised yellow. Machines breathed for her in shallow beeps, each one landing in my chest. I held Alara's hand, too light, like paper folded too many times, and watched her lips tremble with words she was too tired to carry. Arthur, I'm sorry, she whispered, eyes glistening. I couldn't protect this family. I let them. Her voice dissolved into the sterile air. I brushed hair from her forehead. "No," I said, though the word cracked. "You've done everything. You were the warmth in this house." The monitor chimed like a metronome counting toward an ending I didn't want to know. I sat with her through the long drift of night, the smell of antiseptic thick as guilt. The hallway lights flickered like tired stars. When my phone buzzed, I looked down instinctively. Maybe hope, maybe mercy. Instead, lines of text glowed sharp and cold. Status on the finances? Any update on her policy? Not a single "how is mom?" My throat closed. I felt something inside flex, then break. A nurse adjusted a line of clear fluid, her eyes soft. "Get some rest," she whispered. I almost laughed. How do you rest when the ground has disappeared? I pressed my forehead lightly to the back of my wife's hand. Alara breathed in a thin, rattling thread, then exhaled a memory. When dawn finally scraped its way into the windows, she slipped into unconsciousness. I stood alone in the doorway, the quiet heavier than grief. I thought of the letters we once wrote, sealed with tiny hearts we were embarrassed to show. We promised each other simple things: garden tomatoes, soft hands at old age, a porch swing that needed oiling. Dreams so small they should have lived forever. I walked the hospital corridor, passing families clutching coffee like life rafts, faces creased with fear and love. Our bench sat empty. That emptiness felt like testimony. Later, the doctor cleared his throat, hands folded like bad news. His words were gentle, but the world slammed shut. The walk to the car was a long fall. The seatbelt wouldn't click, my fingers wouldn't work, the engine's rumble felt obscene. 2 days later, the funeral. Gray sky, wet grass, carnations again. I stood by the casket, rain tapping my umbrella in steady taps like someone knocking politely to be let into heartbreak. No footsteps behind me, no children at my side. Liam didn't even text. Sophia posted a photo of brunch. My breath clouded out in front of me, disappearing faster than I could summon another. The priest spoke to empty pews, voice hollow, echo bouncing off wood. When he asked if anyone wished to say a few words, silence answered first, then me. I stepped forward, voice low. She loved small joys. She deserved better. My hand trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. After the ceremony, I stood by the grave as the final shovel of dirt disappeared her name. The sound was dull, final. A single drop of rain slid down my cheek, meeting another that wasn't rain. My heart felt like a room someone had walked out of without closing the door. Back home, the house smelled like lavender and dust. The bed was made too perfectly. Her book remained open on page 93, spine softened by love. I touched the pillow where the curve of her head once rested. It was cold. The phone vibrated again. "We need access to the documents." "When can we talk insurance?" My voice shook with a sudden quiet fire. "Your mother is gone," I texted back. The typing bubble blinked, then disappeared. No reply. I sat at the kitchen table, palms flat against the wood we sanded ourselves one summer. I looked at my hands and saw hesitation carved into them, years of swallowing discomfort, choosing peace over honesty. I whispered to the empty chair across from me, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Then something shifted. My sorrow narrowed into purpose. The air sharpened, the walls leaned closer, listening. This wasn't just grief, it was revelation. My own children had traded compassion for opportunity, affection for ledger lines. They had danced on the quiet suffering of the woman who raised them. I stood, slower than I felt. The house creaked in answer. My reflection in the window didn't look defeated anymore. It looked awake, the kind of awake that doesn't go back to sleep. A steady breath filled my lungs. "I won't let her be forgotten," I said to the room, voice low, steady. "Not like this." The refrigerator hummed in reply as if the house itself approved. "And I won't let them write the ending." I walked to the mantel, touching the frame of our wedding photo. The edges were warm from sunlight. "You deserve justice," I whispered. The word tasted like metal, fierce and true. And in that quiet moment, something inside me straightened, spine clicking into alignment. The man who endured, who stayed silent, who forgave too soon, he stepped back. In his place stood someone older, sharper, patient enough to wait, deliberate enough to act. Maybe even capable of a sweet revenge that didn't scorch the earth, but restored what was broken. How far can betrayal bend love before it becomes duty? How long can silence stand before purpose speaks? And when justice calls, What kind of man refuses to answer? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow, and I truly appreciate it. I sat in Alara's study with sunlight slanting across the wedding photograph. The edges of her smile caught dust like small promises. Behind the glass, someone had tucked a folded scrap of paper, careful, deliberate handwriting. Arthur, you are the only one I trust. Look in my cloud account. Project Smile. The name made my throat ache with how small it sounded, how intimate. Her computer hummed like an old appliance, lemon polish and warm plastic in the air. I typed the password she left me and found a hidden folder. Inside were audio files, dated, labeled private. I pressed play. Her voice came first, thin and steady. You can't make me sign, she said. I won't. A man's voice cut in, flat and clinical. Mom, you have to. If you don't transfer Crescent, our project collapses. Everything goes under. She coughed. That's my mother's land. It's memories, Arthur. Memories don't pay bills, Liam said. The tone was practiced, the impatience of someone with a spreadsheet in his head. We'll turn it into a resort. Millions. If you don't sign, I'll tell everyone you sabotaged our future. A small sound left her, half sob, half fall. My hands, which had felt steady, found a little tremor then. The room tilted in a way grief does, slow and cold. I listened until the recording felt like proof lodged under my ribs. Words circled. Insurance. Transfer. Deadline. Business syntax attached to a woman's life. Sophia's voice slid in, soft and brittle. It's the smart move. Later, a muffled laugh and the clink of glasses, music on the other end of a small catastrophe. I moved through her desk with a new surgical attention. There was a letter addressed to our family attorney, Thomas Johnson, my old friend. The envelope was dated 3 months before. Inside lay a will, precisely drafted instructions, and a note in her hand. Project Smile translated into legal scaffolding. Conditional transfers, clauses about care and respect, and a peculiar, tender instruction. A community library for children she called the Smile Project. Thomas explained it to me as if he were reading an architecture, temporary rights for business use, enforceable moral covenants, a 3-month window to prove good faith, and an automatic reversion clause if neglect, coercion, or disrespect was shown. If they failed, if they missed the conditions, the rights would revert to me in full. She had set thresholds, care, community involvement, and a specific obligation to help create that library. It was not spite, it was a lesson, it was Alara. I thought of how she had taught me years ago to fold a napkin for dinner guests, patient and precise. The design of this will was the same, teaching by structure, by condition, by the possibility of redemption. She had not wanted to ruin them, she had wanted to hold them accountable. But the recordings were worse than I feared. There were late-night calls where plans were framed like negotiations, texts that read like contracts, boasts about closing the deal while her shoulders stooped a little more each week. Evidence smelled of paper and coffee, urgency and entitlement. It was small-scale domestic cruelty, clean, rational, and relentless. Here the betrayal was precise. Thomas said quietly, she wanted the lesson to be fair, Arthur. She wanted you to have the facts. Facts. The word felt thin and sacred in the same breath. I could have stormed out then, but Alara had given me another route, patience as instrument. She'd given me law as language, and that meant restraint, process rather than spectacle. My plan shaped that day. I would gather her proof as she intended, preserve, timestamp, witness. I would not shout the truth into corners. I would present it in places that valued evidence. The court, the attorney's notes, official records. She had made a map. I would follow it. I replayed a clip until cadence was a thing I could recite in my sleep. The little hitch in Liam's voice when he lied, the clipped breath that prefaced a threat. I learned their tells. I learned the places where cruelty hid behind commerce. I saw how they had learned to call intimacy leverage. A memory rose. Alara in the kitchen, son on the counter telling me, "We built this small world, Arthur. Keep it safe." I had promised her that then. I had not understood what keeping safe would demand. I met with Thomas again. He walked me through the legal scaffolding, the witnesses we'd need, how to prove coercion not as sentiment but as a pattern of behavior, repeated calls, opportunistic transactions, absence at the visitation, the record of attempts to isolate her. He advised caution. He advised thoroughness. She built it ironclad, he said. She thought of the loopholes. I thought of Liam and Sophia, faces I had watched learn to balance spoons, faces I had steadied on bicycles. How did hunger grow so sharp? How did they come to practice cruelty like a craft? The answer threaded through ordinary choices: entitlement, opportunity, the schooling of their own ambition. There was also a man named Wallace, a lawyer whose name kept appearing in the files: memos, meetings, a signature line on a transfer draft. He was not someone I knew then, but I would learn him. Names, I discovered, sit like cards on a table. You play the ones you need. I did not want spectacle. I wanted truth. I wanted them to stand in the hollow their choices had made and recognize it. If there was a path to redemption, it would be through recognition and repair, not hush or forgiveness offered without accountability. Alara's covenant allowed for that: evidence, opportunity, consequence. That evening I sat with the recordings and the will and let resolve settle in like an old coat. Not fury, no swaggering revenge, no joy in ruin. Sweet revenge was not what Alara taught. She taught measured correction. Still, there was a small, private satisfaction in knowing the pattern could be shown, in knowing the map existed. How do you turn love into law without losing love? How do you make consequence kind? And when a lifetime of tenderness meets the sharp calculus of contracts, what does justice look like at the kitchen table? I folded the papers into the envelope she had prepared and felt for a moment that the plan she left was the truest thing she had ever given me, a way to be brave on her behalf by being careful. I would follow that map. I would honor her by being exact. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, releasing the muted scent of coffee and polished wood. I stepped into Thomas Johnson's office, sunlight pooling across neat stacks of documents. Thomas rose to greet me, his tie slightly crooked the way it always had been, eyes carrying more weight than they used to. He handed me a thick envelope, fingertips lingering for half a second, just long enough to say what words would complicate. "She was worried," he murmured, voice lowered. "About you, about them." I nodded once. The envelope felt heavier than paper should be. We sat. The leather chair creaked as I unfolded the documents. Legal clauses, stamped pages, recorded timestamps, her quiet armor. "Alara didn't want punishment," Thomas said. "She wanted consequence." He tapped a page. "There's a difference." My thumb brushed her initials. Sharp, steady, elegant. I breathed in through the nose, and there it was again. Lavender ink, the faint scent she always loved. The room tightened around me. Meanwhile, elsewhere, at a cafe with clean lines and empty laughter, Liam leaned forward, fingers drumming. "Bank's still holding. The old man's hiding something." Sophia sipped her drink, glossy nails tapping glass. "Patience. Crescent gives us leverage. He won't see it coming." They laughed then, soft with confidence. A waiter passed by, oblivious. The world keeps spinning even when decency stops. Back in Thomas's office, he leaned forward. "You found the recordings?" "I did," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I heard enough to know intent." He folded his hands. "Intent is everything in cases like these." Later at home, I opened a new audio file. Automated uploads Alara had quietly configured. Their voices slurred with liquor, background bass thudding like a heartbeat out of rhythm. "Who'd go to that boring funeral?" Liam scoffed. Sophia laughed, high, brittle. "Can't believe she signed so easy." "Easy," Liam barked. "Blind love makes people stupid." The laughter that followed was short, ugly. A cork popping punctuated it, glasses clinking like celebration after a theft. I paused the file. The silence afterward was worse. It wasn't forged documents, it wasn't fabricated signatures, it was their voices, eager, cold, proud. I closed my eyes, picturing Alara by the window, shoulder small beneath an oversized sweater. She had carried the family drama alone, hiding the erosion in her spine. She never wanted me to see her break, so she broke quietly. The phone rang. Thomas again. "One more thing," he said. "A hidden clause: if they show neglect, coercion, or contempt within 3 months, then full reversion, no appeals." I exhaled slowly. Alara had understood their hunger better than I did. She knew how easily ambition turns to appetite. I drove to Crescent Lake that evening. The water held the last smear of sunset, trees black against orange. That land wasn't about value, it was about continuity. Her grandmother's hands planting apple trees. Summer nights with fireflies. Quiet promises. The kind you don't say but live. My phone buzzed again, new messages from them. We need access to the safe. Update your signature. Time sensitive? Not a single mention of her, not one. I scrolled further, screenshots from a group chat of theirs. Once we get the land, we can flip the narrative. He'll fade out. Fade out, as if I were furniture. I found myself whispering to the empty room, "You were supposed to be better than this." The words hung heavy as lead. I printed transcripts, labeled audio logs, organized everything into boxes that once stored Christmas ornaments, evidence where memories used to be. My hands moved with mechanical calm, each movement an act of respect. Let consequence tell the story my voice no longer needed to. At night the house felt cavernous. Shadows stretched long across carpet. A lamp flickered, tapping softly like someone thinking. I sat by her favorite armchair, thumb brushing the fabric threadbare from years of warmth. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked the dark. The dark did not answer. But the evidence did. Days passed. Meetings, signatures, witness affidavits. The machinery of truth is slow, but it grinds. Then a moment, the shift. Thomas slid across a file. Inside, a timeline of contacts, loan proposals, pressure correspondence. It wasn't just greed, it was strategy. They had premeditated every conversation with her, distilled her into opportunity. Lightning didn't strike, the world didn't roar. Justice is quieter than people expect. It whispers before it arrives. That night I listened to the final recording. Liam's voice, smug as smoke. "Dad's clueless. He'll die with books and coffee pods. We'll build something real." Sophia hummed agreement. "And when it's done, we won't owe anyone." Not owe anyone, except the woman in the ground. I pressed stop and the quiet bloomed again. My anger didn't flare. It settled. Dense. Focused. There are storms made not of thunder, but of patience. I stood from the chair, spine straight. "We finish this in daylight," I told the empty room, my voice barely above breath, but breath is enough to start a fire. And somewhere deep beneath the grief, beneath the quiet ache, I felt something click into alignment. Not vengeance born of heat, but purpose born of clarity. The kind of purpose that waits for its moment. The kind of purpose that knows the cost of mercy. When the ones you love redraw the lines of loyalty, what shape does justice take? When memory becomes evidence, where does forgiveness end and consequence begin? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing and share in the comments what time it is where you are right now. I'd love to know how far it goes. I truly appreciate it. I sat across from Liam and Sophia in Thomas Johnson's office, the air thick as old paper. The lamp hummed. The clock on the wall kept its even, indifferent time. They looked like children pretending to be adults. Sharp clothes, sharper smiles. Liam's lip curled. Sophia folded and unfolded a legal pad with restless fingers. "What do you want, Dad? A share of the inheritance?" Liam sneered. "You have no right to the property on Crescent Lake. Mom already signed it over to us." I kept my voice low and steady. "You think you've won? You think Ilara was so weak you could bend her to your will?" I set a small recorder on the table, pressed the red button like a judge slamming a gavel. The file played, voices I knew too well, sharp, careless, triumphant. Their laughter cut the room like glass. "That's not," Liam started, then the sentence died in his mouth. The confidence drained away. "Is that," Sophia breathed, and the breath sounded like a confession. Thomas laid a neat stack of papers down with the calm of a man used to storms. "This," he said, "is Ilara Caldwell's final will, properly executed, witnessed, clear." Liam's fist slammed the wood. "That's impossible! She signed transfers to us! Wallace will prove it!" Thomas did not rise to the bait. He slid a particular document forward with the gravest patience. Ilara anticipated these moves. She drew a limited agreement, a temporary license to use the Crescent land for 5 years. Only if you, during that period, demonstrate moral care toward your father and commit to her community project, a free children's library. Fail within 3 months and the license collapses. Title reverts to Arthur Caldwell. A slow, cold silence gathered in the room. It sat on top of us like winter. "And there is more," Thomas said. She included an ethical clause. Any documented neglect, coercion, or contempt toward Arthur in that span triggers immediate reversion. No loopholes. Sophia's face folded. "She set a trap," she whispered. "Ilara didn't trap you," I said. My voice held no triumph, only a steady, steady thing. She gave you one last chance to be decent. You chose otherwise. You chose the party, the ledger's quick comfort, over goodbye. You used her when she was hurting. I placed Alara's wedding photograph on the table, and the light softened the smile that had kept us warm for 30 years. Their faces were statues now, white, shocked, very young in their sudden comprehension. This is not revenge, I told them. This is consequence. Liam tried to bluster. You can't do this. I didn't do it, I interrupted. She did. She planned. She protected what mattered. If the law upholds her, we let it speak. The room contracted and then exhaled as if the truth had tunneled a way through us. Outside, traffic went on, indifferent. Inside, the papers made a noiseless argument. Affidavits, timestamps, witness statements, neighbors who saw late-night visits, security stills, funeral parlor logs confirming I was the only person at the vigil. The evidence was not a single knife. It was a careful mosaic. We're not monsters, Sophia said. Her voice sounded thin and pleading. Maybe not monsters, I answered, but choices have gravity. I watched them shrink under the weight of what their hands had done. The law has an anatomy. Alara sewed its seams with the precision of someone who loved both justice and thrift. Thomas cleared his throat. The clause is unusual but structurally sound. Conditional conveyance with moral performance triggers. If elder neglect or coercion is proven, rights revert immediately. Liam reached for bargaining. Lawyers, counterclaims, PR statements. We had expected theater. They would try to fill the air with noise to drown the facts. We had expected that, so we had patience and chain of custody logs that hummed like machinery, quiet, relentless. They began begging, less for forgiveness than for leverage. Give us time. Let us prove ourselves. We'll honor her memory. They offered promises like fresh coins, brightly minted. Promises, I asked. Promise is how she fed your childhood. Promise without change is not a contract. Thomas nodded. The options for them narrowed like the frame of a photograph. Outside, afternoon softened into gray. The city did not pause. Inside, a reckoning unfolded in small, deliberate steps. A recording here, a notarized page there, a timestamp that refused to be moved. Alara had built defense from ink and paper the way others build gardens from soil, methodically, with stubborn love. They left differently than they came. Not humbled, too slick for that, but altered. That wind of invincibility they carried had been punctured by proof. For the first time, they had to see themselves reflected in something other than their own appetite. I did not feel victory, not like that. It was quieter, a work completed, a promise fulfilled. The slow machine of law moving, precise and patient, sounded to me like a bell for truth. I folded Alara's photograph back into its frame and held it to my chest. The weight was comfort and sorrow braided together. I whispered to the empty office, to the files, to the woman in the picture, you were right. The ledger of years tilted toward balance. It was not vindication I sought, only restoration. The law would not bring her back, but it could guard what remained. They would gossip. I knew that too, the kind of whisper that turns grief into a spectacle. Headlines, op-eds, the click-and-scroll crowd eager for drama. The outside world loves a neat arc. Villain, fall, spectacle. But Alara had built something uglier and more honest than talk. She had built a legal backbone, a living testament that would outlast the hour-by-hour chatter. The moral clause, the timestamps, the recorded voices, all of it stitched a roof over what was left. Beneath that, something colder and clearer resided, betrayal. It sat like a shard catching the office light. It hurt, it purified, it made the path forward visible. And yes, the papers in the courthouse would not be theater, they would be work, they would be proof, they would be the slow, steady kind of justice that does not roar but endures. I had expected grief to be the loudest thing. Instead, the loud thing was silence filled with documents. I turned to Thomas. We'll proceed, I said, methodically, carefully for her. He offered a brief human nod. She prepared the route, we will walk it. I felt neither triumph nor malice. I felt a deep, weary gratitude that she had foreseen enough to protect a life and to teach, even after leaving us, what it meant to hold someone sacred. The law became a tool of preservation, not merely punishment. How do I go on when children turn love into ledgers and the law into voice? Forgive? Let go? The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the kind of scent that settles into suits and memories. I walked past rows of benches until I reached the table reserved for petitioners. My palms rested against the cool wood, steady this time. I wasn't the man who whispered to shadows anymore. A judge entered, robe swaying like a drawn curtain, and the room rose as one. When we sat, the clock above the bench ticked. Slow, stern. Thomas stood, glasses glinting beneath the fluorescent wash. "Your Honor," he began, his voice measured, "this case concerns not just property, but principle." He moved with calm precision, sliding documents forward, one page at a time. Alara's final will, notarized and witnessed, the audio files, cataloged and transcribed, the evidence of coercion, the timeline of neglect. He didn't raise his voice, and still each word landed like a nail. Across the aisle, Liam shifted in his suit, eyes darting as though someone might save him from the truth. Sophia stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Their attorney, a sleek man with a polished tie, cleared his throat and murmured, "Objection, inflammatory." But the judge lifted a hand. "Overruled. Continue." The gavel's echo felt like the answer to a prayer I never dared speak aloud. When it was my turn to testify, I stood. The microphone caught the soft rasp of breath. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here for dignity. My wife worked her entire life preserving what little we had, believing in the softness of family. She hoped her children would grow into their better selves. The conditions she set were not punishment. They were her final test of love." A hush settled. Thomas clicked a remote, and the screen behind us flickered. Footage from Evergreen Funeral Home. There I was, beside a casket draped with carnations, the pews behind me empty. Chairs waited like unanswered invitations. The judge's brow lowered, an expression more eloquent than any gavel. Then came the second clip. A club, neon wash, bass pounding, laughter, my children's, danced across the speakers. Their words, thick with drink and triumph, described inheritance strategies, closing the deal, how to liquidate Crescent Land once the old man got out of the way. The contrast between noise and silence clattered through the courtroom. Their attorney rose, face flushed. "Your Honor, my clients were grieving in their own way." The judge's gaze cut him off. "Sit down." Sophia's eyes glimmered with something I couldn't read. Regret, or simply fear of losing. Liam hunched forward, whispering to counsel, but each whisper sounded like a stone sinking. When the prosecutor called upon experts, they spoke of elder financial abuse, coercion, psychological pressure. Their words were clinical, but the weight of them felt personal. Finally, Thomas held up the covenant clause. "This language," he said, "states clearly that failure to provide responsible care or respect results in immediate forfeiture. This is not hidden. It is plain." The judge leaned forward to read it himself, lips pursed. When we recessed, I stared at the grain of the table, saw decades of conversations folded into wood, holiday dinners, grocery lists, birthday candles. My reflection on its surface looked older than I remembered. Returning to session, the judge began. His voice was deep, gravelly from a lifetime of sentencing. "The evidence demonstrates coercion, neglect, and disregard for the decedent's wishes." He paused, letting silence widen. "This court upholds the will of Alara Caldwell. Full title to the Crescent property and all associated financial instruments will transfer to her spouse, Arthur Caldwell." A gasp rippled. The judge wasn't done. "Furthermore, due to demonstrated psychological distress inflicted upon the decedent and legal fees required for this probate action, the respondents will compensate the petitioner accordingly." Liam's mouth hung open. Sophia clutched her chest, whispering, "This can't be happening." I didn't answer. The truth had already spoken. Journalists scribbled. A camera lens glinted like a tiny cold moon. Headlines would spin. Heirs accused. Inheritance scandal. But the world's noise was smaller than the quiet I carried inside. When the gavel fell, it sounded like a door closing, or opening. Outside, clouds drifted across a clean blue sky. Thomas exhaled. "She would be proud," he said. I nodded, unable to speak. Pride wasn't the word. Peace, maybe. Relief that the world had not swallowed her gentle efforts without acknowledging their worth. Our steps rang against marble tiles. At the courthouse exit, the automatic doors sighed open and delivered us into daylight. The air tasted sharper, like something had been unknotted. Later, papers were signed, accounts transferred, ownership recorded. Bureaucracy is not romantic, but permanence rarely is. I sat in the clerk's office watching each stamp fall, red as heartbeats. With each, something settled inside me. Across town, social media churned. Their names trended for the wrong reasons. Eyes they once impressed now narrowed with judgment. Invitations dried like spilled ink. The same friends who toasted their ambition now preferred distance. A public fall is quieter than people expect. It happens in emails not returned, opportunities that never call back, shoulders turning politely. I did not celebrate. I went home. In the living room, the lamp glowed warm against the spines of books we collected through the years. I touched her armchair, still faintly scented of lavender. The house felt fuller, as though its walls exhaled. I sat, closed my eyes, listened, not to silence, but to completion. Grief is not defeated, it is integrated, and justice is not triumph, it is equilibrium. I whispered to the room, "Rest now." Outside, a breeze shifted the curtains, and for a moment it felt like someone walking past gently, as if not to wake me. How do we measure justice when the heart is involved? Is it the verdict or the quiet after, when memory is no longer contested and love becomes indisputable fact? Winter crept in quietly that year, the kind of cold that turns sidewalks brittle and leaves black veins in the sky. Months had passed since the verdict, and the world had done what it always does with noisy stories. It chewed, swallowed, and moved on. But some echoes stay lodged beneath the ribs. I saw them once, from a distance, standing in front of their old penthouse. The balcony where they'd toasted their future empire now hid behind a bright red sign. Sold. Liam's hands hung uselessly at his sides, pockets empty of purpose. Sophia stared up as if she might find her old life pressed against the glass. A gust of wind ruffled her hair, and neither reached for each other. Investors had pulled out of their resort project like teeth from aching gums. Rumors spread, then headlines, then court filings. The developers who once begged for meetings no longer returned calls. One email leak, just one, showed them celebrating the funeral absence, and a whisper grew teeth. The label stuck. Greedy heirs. The internet loves a villain. It never forgets. Liam applied everywhere. Technology firms, real estate offices, even a marketing agency. Each rejection letter read the same, polite fonts, masking disgust. The whisper became a wall. He stopped shaving. His eyes reddened. The smell of whiskey clung to him like disappointment. People at bars leaned away. Bartenders watched him pour bitterness into a glass and call it coping. Sophia retreated indoors, blinds drawn. Her once busy phone blinked fewer and fewer notifications. Group chats fell silent. Invitations evaporated. The friends who once praised her ambition now kept their distance, afraid of the stain. Loneliness doesn't shout, it rusts. One afternoon I walked into Alara's favorite cafe, a small place near Main Street where the coffee tasted like Sunday mornings and the chairs creaked like old wood floors. The bell chimed softly as I entered. Jazz whispered from dusty speakers. I sat where she used to sit, sunlight warm on my hands, and opened a book. The bitterness in winter coffee tastes sharper than summer. That's when I heard it, hesitant footsteps. "Dad?" The voice wavered. I lifted my eyes, and there she was, Sophia, pale, eyes ringed with sleepless nights. She looked older in the wrong ways. Grief has fingerprints. I blinked once. "Sit," I said, not as an invitation, but as a statement. She sat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Hands trembled around nothing. Tears gathered but didn't fall. "I didn't understand. I didn't know Mother—" "You didn't ask," I said, calm, cutting. She flinched like I'd struck her. The cafe's warm light made the moment crueler. Kindness can be sharp when you realize you've wasted it. "I followed Liam," she continued. "He said it was the future, that you were outdated, that Crescent was wasted on nostalgia." Her voice cracked. "I thought we were building something new." "You were burning something old," I replied. She swallowed, eyes glossy. "I thought she'd want us to succeed. That money was the way." "And you never asked what success meant to her," I said. "You replaced love with profit, respect with leverage." A long silence settled, deep enough to hear the fridge hum behind the counter. "You hate us," she whispered. "No," I answered. "Hate requires space in the heart, and I won't make room for this." Her breath shuddered. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Yes," she said instantly. I shook my head gently. "No, you regret the consequences. That's different." She reached for my hand. I didn't offer it. Her fingers stopped halfway, suspended like a confession. "I thought we were better than people said," she murmured. "You were worse," I said softly. You laughed at your mother's pain." A tear slipped, streaking mascara like ink spilled across a report card. She pressed her palms to her eyes. "How do I fix this?" "You don't fix grief," I said. "You face it, and carry it." My voice dropped to a whisper. "That's the price." She stared at the table. "Wood grain can look like a map if you're lost." I remembered her at 6 years old crying over a broken toy, asking if we could fix it. Back then, tape could solve anything. This was different. You can't tape a soul. "You built your life on surfaces," I said. "Pretty views, loud rooms, fast praise. But nothing grows in lights that bright. Roots need something darker, something quieter." Her shoulders caved inward. "Can you ever forgive me?" I considered the question. Forgiveness is not a trophy. It's a door. Some doors should stay closed until the floor beneath them hardens. "I can't forgive what you haven't repaired," I said. "Not yet." Her breath caught. She nodded, eyes hollow. "I'll try." "Trying's a start," I said, "but results are the only language character speaks." She left a minute later, walking carefully, like the floor might splinter. When the bell chimed behind her, the cafe felt colder. Outside, leaves scraped along the pavement like slow applause. I watched her cross the street alone, arms wrapped around herself, silhouette trembling beneath a gray sky. Winter does that, forces you to feel the space you left behind. In the months that followed, I heard rumors. Liam moved out of the city, picked up odd jobs, struggled with the bottle. Sophia volunteered at a community center, reading to children about kindness and fairness. The irony carved itself onto her face. Redemption attempts are quiet. They rarely trend. Their reputations grew scar tissue. No magazine wanted their smiling features. No investor wanted their eager handshake. Even former friends pretended not to see them in grocery aisles. Social exile is subtle. It's the absence of hello. People said I must feel satisfied, that justice finally had teeth, but I felt only the slow ache of witnessing betrayal melt into something sadder, emptiness. One night, seated by the window, cup cooling beside me, I wondered if wealth without wisdom is simply debt with better lighting. I saw their mistake clearly now. They spent love as if it had interest rates. Some debts are paid in silence. How do you rebuild a bridge you set on fire while you danced? How do you ask to come home when you sold the key for applause? I stand on the soil of Crescent Lake, the wind leaving ripples along the water's surface like a quiet hymn. There is no resort, no gaudy promise of wealth stacked into glass towers. Instead, a small library rises in warm colors and cedar scent, painted in soft tones that glow under the afternoon sun. Children's laughter echoes against the shelves, their shoes tapping gently on the wooden floor. This was Alara's dream. A gentle dream, but one that held more weight than their towers ever could. I run my hand along a shelf lined with stories older than the fears that once tightened my chest. The wood is warm, as though memory lives inside it. For so long I lived quietly, believing love alone could soften greed. But I learned silence can sometimes feed the wrong beast. Now I choose boundaries, steady and unwavering. Pain didn't hollow me, it carved space for strength. I place a framed photograph of Alara near the window, the one where her smile bent slightly to the left when she tried too hard to hide her joy. Outside, lake grass sways. The world feels honest here. A small boy tugs my sleeve. "Mr. Caldwell, can you read this next?" he asks, eyes wide. I smile, nodding. His voice is soft but hopeful. When I read, the children lean forward, breathing the rhythm of the story. I feel something settle in me. Healing isn't loud, it's pages turning, feet shuffling, breaths sinking into peace. And as I watch them smile, I feel the shadows of old wounds dissolving into something kinder. Weeks pass. An envelope arrives, stamped with the seal of the Heritage Preservation Society. They invite me to join a project restoring ancient manuscripts, an honor I never sought, but somehow fits the shape of this new life. I unfold the letter twice, then once more, as if weight lives between the lines. A second chapter calling. Outside, dusk leans against the lake, orange melting into violet. A quiet voice inside whispers, "Keep going. Keep." I sit alone for a moment, listening to the faint hum of crickets slipping between shelves. My heart steadies. I speak to the empty room, not in sorrow but remembrance. "You were right, Alara. Love is strength when paired with truth." There is no audience, yet the walls seem to breathe. There were days I wanted to fold inward, to grieve until the bones of memory cracked. But this place, this gentle sanctuary, answers differently. Forgiveness is not permission to be wounded again. It is simply choosing to carry peace instead of bitterness. It means honoring the good while protecting the boundaries that guard it. Those who lost themselves to hunger will face their own shadows. My path is here, in light. Children wave goodbye in small clusters. Their joy lifts the dust in glowing spirals. I close the door, and in the quiet click of the latch I hear victory, the kind that blooms, not burns. Some would call this the ending to a family drama, but to me it's where the fog parts and clarity walks in. It wasn't about winning, it was about remembering who I was before whispered cruelty tried to redefine me. And though the world may crave explosive vengeance, true triumph looks more like renewal than destruction. Maybe that's my quiet taste of sweet revenge. The sun sinks. I breathe. A new message blinks on my phone. Someone asking if the library needs volunteers. A sign of connection. A thread woven forward. I step outside, hands in pockets, letting the last light settle. In the end, we are measured not by wealth, but by what survives after we're gone. Respect, kindness, boundaries strong enough to protect both. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to the channel, like it, and share it so others can watch too. Thank you for being here. Wishing you health, peace, and a gentle home. And if you're ready, there's another story waiting.